Pick up the broom, Mariah. That's the only performance anyone paid you for tonight.
Victoria Hale smiled as 300 guests turned.
I can't believe you're here. Look at this place. This is not for you. You don't belong here. Look at that piano. It's worth more than your life. Get out of my gala.
Mariah Bennett stood beside the grand piano, one hand resting near the old silver pendant at her throat.
I was invited.
As a joke. Sing one note, just one. If the room doesn't laugh, I'll let you keep your job. One note is enough.
At the donor table, billionaire conductor Adrian Vale saw the pendant turn in the light. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered.
Where did you get that?
Mariah opened her mouth, and before anyone in that room understood why Adrian had gone pale, the first note came out. We will come back to that note. We will come back to the sound that made a billionaire drop his glass, and the silence that came after it. But the question did not begin in the ballroom. It began 3 nights earlier in a hallway no donor had ever walked through. It was a little after midnight at the Hale Conservatory of Music in Boston. The donors were home. The famous faces were gone. The marble lobby that hosted senators and symphony directors sat empty under one low light. And down a narrow back hallway, where the paint was older and the carpet was thin, a woman moved a mop across the floor in slow, even strokes. Her name was Mariah Bennett, 57 years old, night shift, 2 years on staff, and not one of the famous faces had ever learned her name. She wore a gray work shirt and soft shoes that made no sound. Her hair was going silver at the edges. Around her neck, tucked under her collar where no one ever saw it, hung a small, scratched silver pendant. She cleaned the way some people pray, quietly, completely, as if the work mattered even when nobody watched. Most nights the building was hers and hers alone, but not this night. From behind a closed practice room door at the end of the hall came the sound of a violin. A young player, working late, working hard. The same 4 bars over and over. Mariah stopped mopping. She knew that passage. She knew the exact place where the bow always slipped, the place where the phrase wanted to breathe and the player kept choking it. She knew it because she had once stood in a room very much like that one, decades ago, fighting the same kind of fight. She told herself to keep cleaning. She told herself it was not her business. A cleaning lady does not correct a conservatory student. That was a line, and she had spent 30 years learning not to cross lines. But the girl tried the passage again, and again she strangled it. And before Mariah could stop herself, she did something she had not done in front of another human being in 28 years. She sang it, just the phrase, low and soft, almost under her breath, the way you hum to a sleeping child, the melody the way it was meant to be shaped, rising where the girl had been pushing it down, opening where the girl had been closing it off. The violin stopped. The practice room door opened. A 16-year-old girl stood there in a school sweater 2 sizes too big, her bow still in her hand, staring down the dim hallway at the cleaning lady with the mop. Her name was Sophie Kim, scholarship track, but barely, the kind of student the donors clapped for in brochures and forgot in person. "Miss Mariah," Sophie said slowly. How did you know that? Mariah picked her mop back up. I used to listen, she said. That was all. 3 words. She turned back to the floor as if nothing had happened, but Sophie did not go back inside. She stood in the doorway, and she had heard exactly what the cleaning lady thought she had hidden. That was not the voice of a woman who used to listen. That was the voice of a woman who used to sing. Victoria Hale almost never came to the conservatory after dark, but that week she was rehearsing her own performance. The gala was 3 days away, and she walked the halls like a general inspecting a battlefield, checking flower arrangements, checking the guest list, checking that everything she touched looked expensive enough to deserve her. That was how she turned the corner of the back hallway and saw it. A cleaning lady, leaning toward a scholarship student. The two of them bent over a sheet of music on a music stand, while the girl played and the woman in the gray shirt nodded along, shaping the air with one slow hand. Victoria did not hear talent. Victoria did not hear a gift that should have stopped her in her tracks. She heard a line being crossed. A woman who scrubbed her floors was standing in the same square of light as a student Victoria's foundation paid for. And to a woman like Victoria, that was not sweet. That was disorder. You, she said. What are you doing? Mariah straightened. She had a hard phrase. I helped her find it. You helped her. Victoria let the words sit in her mouth like something sour. Do you know what it costs to study here? Do you have any idea what these instruments are worth? I clean them every night, Mariah said quietly. I have a fairly good idea. For 1 second, Victoria had no answer. And women like Victoria never forgive you for the second when they have no answer. She looked Mariah up and down. The gray shirt, the soft shoes, the silver at her temples. And slowly, a different kind of smile spread across her face. Because Victoria had just had an idea. The gala needed a moment. Every gala needed a moment, something the donors would talk about, something that made Victoria look generous and bold and just a little daring. What better moment than this? The patron of the arts inviting the woman who mopped the floors to stand among the wealthy. They would laugh, they would feel superior, and they would remember whose party made them feel that way. You know what? Victoria said sweetly. I think you should come to the gala. Mariah went still. Saturday night, the Centennial Gala. Wear something clean. Victoria's eyes moved over the gray shirt one more time. Try not to touch anything expensive. She turned and walked away on heels that clicked like a clock. She thought she had just set a trap. She had no idea she had just opened a door that had been locked for 28 years. The gold envelope sat on Mariah's kitchen table for 2 days. She had nearly thrown it away. She knew what it was. She knew what Victoria wanted. A poor woman in a borrowed room so the rich could feel rich. She had said no inside her own heart 100 times. Then on the second night, she opened it. Not because she wanted to go, because something on the embossed card caught her eye, halfway down, under the wine list and the seating notes. A line about the evening's main auction. The lost Eleanor Vale manuscript. Estimated value, $1 million. Mariah's hands went cold. She read it again and again. The card trembled very slightly in fingers that had not trembled in years. She set the invitation down. She walked to her bedroom closet, knelt, and pulled out a box she had not opened since her mother's funeral. The cardboard was soft with age. Inside, folded in tissue, was a black dress. Simple, hand-stitched. The seams still perfect after almost 30 years because the woman who made them had been the finest seamstress the conservatory ever employed. Her mother, Ruth Bennett. Under the dress, wrapped in a square of velvet, was the silver pendant. Mariah lifted it to the lamp, scratched, plain, worth almost nothing to anyone who did not know. She knew. She held it for a long time, and somewhere in that small apartment, in the quiet, she made a decision she had spent half her life avoiding. She was going to that gala. Not to be laughed at, to see what they were selling. The question did not begin in the ballroom, but to understand why a stolen song could break a billionaire's hand, you have to understand what was stolen, and from whom, 28 years before. In the spring of 1996, Mariah Bennett was 29 years old, and she was the brightest voice the Hale Conservatory had heard in a generation. She had not come from money. She came from the basement sewing room where her mother repaired the costumes of students whose parents could buy buildings. Ruth Bennett threaded needles by a single lamp and listened to her daughter practice scales through the heating vents. People in the building called Mariah's voice the Velvet Thunder. Soft enough to make you lean in. Strong enough to fill a hall without a microphone. The professors who pretended not to be impressed were the most impressed of all. And that spring, she had been chosen. The conservatory was turning 100 years old, and the Centennial Preview concert would feature a discovery. A great composer named Eleanor Vail, recently passed, had left behind one final unpublished aria, written by hand, found among her papers. A manuscript worth nearly $1 million. And the soloist chosen to give that aria its first living voice was a scholarship student from the basement, Mariah. Not everyone was happy about that. The dean of the conservatory in those years was a hard, cold man named Walter Hale. He came from old Boston money, and he had a very specific idea of who belonged on his stage and who belonged in his basement. A poor black scholarship girl singing the crown jewel of his centennial was not the picture he wanted on the front page. But Eleanor Vail, before she died, had been very clear. There was a connection there, an old kindness, a promise. The aria was to be sung by Ruth Bennett's daughter, Eleanor had insisted. And so Ruth, in the weeks before the recital, sat up past midnight at her sewing machine and made her daughter a dress. Plain black, no sequins, no shine. Ruth did not believe a true voice needed decoration. "Don't sing to be accepted," she told Mariah the night she finished it. "Sing so the room has to tell the truth." The recital was 3 days away. And then the manuscript disappeared. It vanished from a locked archive on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, the most valuable document in the building was gone, and by Wednesday afternoon, the conservatory had decided who took it. Not a professor, not a board member, not anyone with a name carved over a doorway. The scholarship girl. The one with the key to the practice wing. The one who cleaned past midnight. The one whose mother had access to every floor. It did not matter that there was no proof. It did not matter that Mariah had spent that Tuesday night exactly where she always was, in a practice room, singing the aria she loved until her throat ached. What mattered was that she was the easiest person in the building to blame, and the cheapest one to lose. The dean called her into his office. Walter Hale did not raise his voice. Men like him never had to. He told her the scholarship was being withdrawn. He told her the recital would feature another soloist. He told her that if she made trouble, if she said one word to the press, her mother's job in the basement would end that same day. A local paper printed it anyway. They called her the scholarship thief. They printed her photograph, not the photographs of the men who held the only keys to the safe. The Velvet Thunder was gone from the stage before it ever sang a single public note. And her mother, who had threaded needles in that basement for 20 years, was let go 6 weeks later. Budget reasons, they said. Everyone knew what kind of budget they meant. Ruth Bennett never worked at the conservatory again. She took in sewing at the kitchen table. She told her daughter every single night that the truth was patient, that it would wait for them, that someday a room would have to listen. She died 2 years later. Her heart, the doctors said. Mariah always thought the word was incomplete. It was not her heart that failed. It was the world's refusal to believe her. And here's the thing people never understood about Mariah Bennett. She did not stop singing because she lost her voice. She stopped singing because every note reminded her of the room that would not protect her. She left music. She took whatever work she could find. Cleaning offices, cleaning hotels, cleaning, in the end, the very building that had thrown her away. People asked her, the few who knew, why she would ever go back there. Why scrub the floors of the place that destroyed her? She never gave them the real answer. The real answer was simple. She did not want that building to forget what it had done. And as long as she walked its halls at midnight with her mother's pendant under her collar, it never could. Saturday night arrived cold and clear. The Hale Conservatory blazed with light. 300 guests in tuxedos and gowns climbed the marble steps under a banner that read, in gold letters, 100 years of music, one night to change a child's future. Mariah arrived in her mother's black dress. She climbed the same steps as the donors, and at the top, a young man in a security blazer put out a polite hand and stopped her. "Ma'am, staff entrance is around the side." "I'm a guest," Mariah said. The young man's name was Daniel Reyes, security captain. He had a list on a tablet, and he looked at it, and he looked at her, and Mariah watched him expect to find nothing. Then he found something. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. Bennett, Mariah Bennett. He looked at her again, differently this time. He had clearly been told a story about who would be on this list and who would not. You're on here." "I know," she said. He stepped aside, but she felt his eyes follow her in, the way you watch a thing that does not add up. Inside, the ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. And the moment Mariah stepped through the doors in her plain, hand-stitched dress, she felt 300 pairs of eyes find her, weigh her, and dismiss her. A woman in diamonds leaned to her friend and did not bother to whisper, "Is that the help?" Did they forget to send someone home? Victoria appeared almost at once, gliding across the floor in silver, delighted. There you are. She took Mariah by the elbow, not gently, and steered her straight through the center of the room so that everyone could see. Everyone, this is Mariah. She cleans our practice rooms. Isn't it wonderful? Tonight we open our doors to everyone. The laughter rippled out behind them like a wake. Victoria deposited her at a small table near the kitchen doors, the worst seat in the room, where the smell of the kitchen came and went and the waiters' carts banged through all night. Stay, Victoria said, the way you speak to a dog, and she walked away to be admired. Mariah sat down. She folded her hands. She did not look angry, and she did not look ashamed. She looked like a woman who was reading the room, because she was. At the front of the ballroom, under its own private spotlight, stood a glass case, and inside the glass case lay the reason Mariah had come. The lost Eleanor Vale manuscript. Yellowed paper, careful ink, displayed open to its final page. A small placard beside it read, "To be auctioned this evening. Estimated value, $1 million. All proceeds benefit the Hale Conservatory Scholarship Foundation." Mariah rose from her table near the kitchen and walked toward it. No one stopped her. No one thought a cleaning woman looking at a glass case was worth stopping. She stood before the manuscript she had been accused of stealing 28 years ago, and she felt the cold come back into her hands, because she knew this aria. She had lived inside it. She had practiced it until it lived inside her. She knew the way Eleanor Vale shaped a final line, the way she let a phrase fall like a stone dropped into still water. And the page in that case was wrong. The handwriting on the final page did not match the rest. The ink sat differently. The last 3 measures, the measures Mariah could have sung in her sleep, were not there at all. In their place was an ending that was tidy and competent and false. She leaned closer to the glass, and her breath fogged it, and she said one sentence so quietly that only the manuscript could hear. "That's not the ending." Behind her, the lights dimmed. A microphone crackled. Victoria's voice rolled across the room like a wave of perfume. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 100 Years of Music." Mariah turned back toward the stage, and she understood that the trap Victoria had set for her was about to become the stage on which Victoria would be undone. Victoria worked the room like a woman auditioning for a crown, which, in truth, she was. By the end of the night, the board would vote on the new chairwoman of the foundation, and Victoria intended to walk out with the title. She talked about generosity. She talked about opening doors. She talked about giving children a future. And then, because cruelty always wants an audience, she found her moment. "In fact," she said, smiling out at the room, "we have a special guest tonight. A woman who works right here in our building. Mariah, stand up. Don't be shy." 300 faces turned to the table by the kitchen. "Mariah cleans our practice rooms," Victoria said warmly. "And I'm told she even gives our students advice on their music. Isn't that something?" The laughter started low. "So I have to ask," Victoria's smile sharpened to a point. "Mariah, you spend so much time around all this great art. Why don't you share some with us? Sing one note, just one. And the rest you already heard. Pick up the broom. Don't look at the chandelier. Don't touch the piano. One note is enough. The glass falling from Adrian Vale's hand. And the note, let me tell you what that note was. Mariah did not sing a scale. She did not sing something safe. She walked to the grand piano she had been ordered not to touch. She rested one hand on its black lacquer like a woman greeting an old friend, and she sang the opening note of the Eleanor Vale aria. The true opening, the one that was not in the manuscript on display, the one that existed nowhere on this earth except in the memory of a woman who had learned it from the composer's own hand 28 years before. One note, pure, dark, enormous. It rose off the strings of the open piano and seemed to hang in the air over 300 heads. And the room that had come to laugh forgot how. A retired pianist at the third table began, silently, to cry. The diamond woman lowered her champagne. The waiters stopped between tables, and Adrian Vale, billionaire conductor, the most decorated musician in that room, rose from his chair with a broken glass at his feet and his face the color of paper. "That was not a trick," he said. Victoria's smile flickered. "It was one note." "It was her note," Adrian said, "and it has not been heard in this building since 1996. Victoria felt the room turning, and she did what people like Victoria always do when they feel the floor move. She reached for power. "Security," she said crisply. "Captain Reyes, please escort Miss Bennett out. She's clearly unwell." Daniel Reyes stood at the edge of the room. Every face turned to him. This was his job. This was the simplest part of his job. Walk over, take the woman's arm, walk her to the door. He took one step, and Adrian Vale's voice cut across the entire ballroom. "Captain, if you touch that woman, you will spend the rest of your career explaining why you removed the only person in this room who can prove that manuscript is a forgery." Daniel stopped. He looked at Victoria, flushed and furious. He looked at Adrian, pale and certain. And he looked at Mariah, standing calm beside the piano, her hand still resting on the wood. "It's all right, Captain," Mariah said softly. "I've been removed from this room before." That sentence landed somewhere deep in Daniel Reyes. He did not know the whole story, but he knew the sound of a true thing when he heard one. He stepped back. "No, ma'am," he said to Victoria. "I won't remove her." For the first time all evening, Victoria Hale looked like a woman who had lost the script. Victoria recovered the only way she knew how. She attacked. "This is absurd. A cleaning woman hums a note and suddenly she's a music expert? Fine." She gestured sharply toward the front. "Dr. Pierce, come up here. Let's let a real authority settle this." Dr. Malcolm Pierce was the curator who had authenticated the manuscript. A careful man in an expensive suit who had been paid very well to say the document was genuine. He came forward with the wary look of a man who suddenly was not sure what he had signed his name to. "Miss Bennett," he said with thin courtesy, "if you truly read music, then read it. The score is right here." He gestured at the open case. "Tell us what you see." It was meant to humiliate her, to expose the gap between humming a tune and reading a professional manuscript. Mariah walked to the case, and she began to read. Not just the notes, She read the breath marks and what they told her about where the singer was meant to pause. She read the pressure of the ink, heavier here where the composer pressed hard, lighter there where her hand was tiring. She read the phrasing, the slurs, the small handwritten word in the margin that meant the line should be sung like a question. She read it the way her mother had taught her to read a contract years ago at a kitchen table. Every word is a witness. Find the word that lies, and you find the truth. And then she reached the final page. This page, she said, was not written by Eleanor Vale. The room went very still. The hand is too even. The composer's late writing shook. There is a tremor in every page but this one, and the ink is too young. She straightened. Whoever forged this ending was a fine copyist, but they did not know how the aria actually ends, because the true ending was never published. It was never recorded. It exists in exactly 2 places. She paused. This pendant and me. Across the room, a 16-year-old girl had been watching all of it. Sophie Kim had come to the gala in the back of a borrowed van with the catering staff because scholarship students were not guests, they were decoration. She had stood by the wall in her one good dress, invisible. But she was not invisible to the one person who had ever truly seen her. And now she understood. The cleaning lady who knew her hard violin passage, the woman who said, "I used to listen," the voice that just silenced 300 people. Sophie crossed the room to Daniel Reyes. "Captain," she whispered, "the archive. There's a drawer they keep locked." The old ledgers from the 90s. I saw it once when I was looking for practice rooms. Everyone says it's just budget records. Daniel looked at her, then at Mariah. Then he made a decision that would change his own life as much as anyone's. "Show me," he said. "I have the master key, and I have a witness." He turned to the stage. "Mr. Vale, we may need 10 minutes. Adrian Vale nodded once, like a conductor cueing an orchestra. "Then let no one leave this room," he said. "Not the manuscript, not Mrs. Hale, not anyone." The archive smelled of old paper and dust. Daniel opened the locked drawer with the master key that Victoria did not know he carried. Inside were the foundation ledgers from 1995 and 1996, bound in cloth, untouched for decades. Sophie laid them on the table under a bare bulb. Mariah turned the pages with steady hands. And there, in a folder marked only with a case number, she found a single typed page she had never seen before. A witness statement, dated the spring of 1996, filed 3 days after the manuscript vanished. It was signed by Ruth Bennett. Mariah read her mother's words by the light of a bare bulb in the basement of the building that had broken them both. Ruth had written that on the night the manuscript disappeared, she had been working late in the costume room. That she had seen Dean Walter Hale leave the archive after midnight, carrying a flat leather case. That she had said good evening, and that he had not answered, and that the next morning the manuscript was gone, and her daughter was the one they came for. The statement had been received by the conservatory administration, and then it had been buried, sealed in a drawer, never given to the press, never given to the police, never given to the girl whose life it could have saved. Mariah did not cry. She had used all those tears long ago. She simply pressed 2 fingers to the page, the way you touch a grave." "She told the truth," Mariah said. "And they put it in a drawer and locked it." 28 years, Daniel said quietly. 28 years, Mariah said. "Bring it upstairs." When they returned to the ballroom, Charles Hale had risen from his seat. Charles was Victoria's husband, the chief executive of Hale Holdings, the largest single donor the conservatory had. He was a calm, careful, gray-haired man who had spent the evening saying very little. He was also the son of Walter Hale, the dean who had thrown Mariah away. He had spent the whole night hoping no one would say his father's name. "This has gone far enough," Charles said, his voice smooth and reasonable, the voice of a man used to ending conversations. "These are serious accusations, and a charity gala is not the place. I propose we adjourn. We'll conduct a private review next week with proper counsel." It was a beautiful move. Private, quiet, controlled. The kind of room where evidence goes to disappear. Adrian Vale was not fooled. "A private review," Adrian repeated. "Charles, your father ran this conservatory in 1996. Your foundation has held the Eleanor Vale Endowment ever since. And tonight, your wife is auctioning a forged manuscript for $1 million. He let it land. "I think we have had quite enough private reviews. Don't you?" Around the room, phones had come out. Dozens of them. The thing about humiliating a powerless woman in front of 300 people is that 300 people are watching when it goes wrong. Charles Hale looked at the cameras, and for the first time, the smooth voice failed him. "You keep mentioning that pendant," Adrian said, turning to Mariah, gentler now. "I broke a glass over it. I think the room deserves to know why." Mariah lifted the silver pendant from her throat. In the light of the chandelier she had been told not to look at, it turned, scratched and plain. "It belonged to Eleanor Vale," Mariah said. "She gave it to my mother as thanks, because when the great composer was old and sick and afraid that her last work would be stolen the moment she died, the only person in this building she trusted was a seamstress in the basement who threaded her needles and kept her secrets. She found the tiny clasp on the side, the one no one had ever noticed, and she opened it. Inside was not a photograph. Inside, folded smaller than a fingernail, was a sliver of paper. On it, in a shaking hand, were 3 measures of music and a set of initials. E.V. The true ending of the aria, in the composer's own hand, carried for 28 years against the heart of the woman they call the thief. "Eleanor gave my mother the ending," Mariah said. "She said a song that mattered should never live in only one place." She was right. They could steal the manuscript, they could forge the last page, but they could never touch this, because no one ever thought to look at the neck of the woman with the mop. The room did not make a sound, and from the donor table, a man Mariah did not know stood slowly. An independent musicologist in town for the centennial, the one expert in the building no one had thought to bribe. "May I see that?" he asked. She let him. He compared the fragment to the manuscript in the case under a jeweler's loupe borrowed from the diamond woman. Paper, ink, hand. He took a long time, because real experts always do. When he looked up, his voice carried to every corner. "The fragment is genuine, early. The hand matches the rest of the manuscript, and the final page on display He shook his head. The final page is a modern forgery. This woman is correct in every particular. Now the room understood the forgery, but Adrian Vale understood something larger, and he said it out loud. Eleanor Vale did not only leave a manuscript, he said. She left an endowment. Nearly $1 million given to this foundation the year she died, earmarked in her own will for scholarship students, for the children who could never afford this place. He turned to face Charles Hale. So here is my question, Charles. The manuscript vanished in 1996. A scholarship student was blamed and expelled. Her name cleared the way for that endowment to be quietly absorbed into foundation accounts the family controlled. The scholarships Eleanor wanted shrank year after year, while the Hale name grew larger over the door. His voice was very quiet now. How much of that $1 million ever reached a single poor child? Charles Hale said nothing, which was, in that room, a kind of answer. It was Mariah who finished it, not with anger, with the calm of a woman who had carried the truth so long it had stopped being heavy. They did not destroy my life because I stole something, she said. They destroyed my life because blaming me was cheaper than honoring an old woman's wish. I was not a thief. I was an expense they could remove. Victoria saw the room turn against her completely, and she changed her face the way other people change a coat. Mariah. Her voice went soft, wounded, warm. I had no idea. None of this. The past, the manuscript, your mother. I am so deeply sorry. If I had known, I would never have. Would you be apologizing, Mariah said, if I had missed the note? Victoria stopped. If I had opened my mouth and croaked, Mariah went on evenly, and the room had laughed the way you planned, would you be sorry then? Or would you be accepting your chairwoman's medal right now and telling this story at parties for years? Victoria had no answer. That's the difference, Mariah said, between regret and fear. Regret is sorry for what it did. Fear is only sorry it got caught. You are not sorry, Mrs. Hale. You are exposed. They are not the same thing. She did not raise her voice once. She did not have to. The board of the Hale Conservatory Foundation did not wait for Monday. In front of 300 witnesses and several dozen phones, the senior board member rose and announced that the auction was suspended. The manuscript would be sealed as evidence, and an independent audit of every foundation account going back to 1995 would begin immediately. Adrian Vale announced that he would resign from the board that very night if the investigation were delayed by a single day. He did not need to. No one dared delay it. Charles Hale was asked to step away from the foundation pending the audit. He left through a side door, alone, his smooth voice silent at last. And Victoria. Victoria stood on the stage she had built to crown herself, under the lights she had aimed at her own glory, and watched the title of chairwoman dissolve in front of her. No one came to comfort her. The friends who had left an hour ago studied their drinks. The diamond woman had quietly moved her chair. She stood alone on her own stage, and down on the floor, beside a 16-year-old violin student, stood the cleaning lady, who needed no spotlight at all. It was Adrian Vale who asked, "Miss Bennet," he said, "the room has heard one note, and it has heard a great deal of testimony. I think it is time it heard the truth. Will you sing it? The whole aria, the way Eleanor wrote it, the way it was meant to be heard 28 years ago, before they took it from you." Maria looked out at the room. Then she looked at Sophie. "I won't sing it alone," she said. "There's a violin part. Eleanor wrote it for 2 voices, the singer and the strings." She held out her hand to the girl. "Will you play it with me?" Sophie's eyes went wide. "Miss Maria, I can't. That's in front of all these." "You played it alone in a dark practice room at midnight when you thought nobody could hear you," Maria said gently. "That's the hardest audience there is. This one is easy." Sophie lifted her violin. And in the great ballroom of the Hale Conservatory, a teenage scholarship student and a 57-year-old cleaning woman performed the lost aria of Eleanor Vale. Complete, the true ending and all, for the first time in the history of the world. This was not a performance to show off a voice. It was a funeral, finally held, for a composer's last wish, for a mother who sewed a dress and told the truth into a sealed drawer, for a 29-year-old girl who never got to sing. Maria sang the last 3 measures, the measures that had lived against her heart in a silver pendant for 28 years, and her voice did not break. When the final note faded, no one moved. The first person to rise was not a donor. It was a waiter. The same young man who an hour earlier had whispered, "This is wrong." He set down his tray, and he stood, and he put his hands together. Then Sophie's mother, in the back by the catering door, stood. Then Daniel Reyes. Then the rest of the staff along the walls, the servers and the dishwashers and the coat check girl, the people who were supposed to be invisible, stood as one. And only then, last of all, after the people who knew what it cost to be overlooked, did the donors rise. The diamond woman, the board, 300 people on their feet, in a silence too large for cheering. Adrian Vale stood among them with tears on his face, an old conductor who had waited 28 years to hear an aria end correctly. Mariah stood in the center of it, in her mother's black dress, with her mother's pendant catching the light, and she did not know where to look. So she looked down at Sophie, and she put a hand on the girl's shoulder. The cleaning lady had not come for applause. She had come so that a room that refused to listen would finally have no choice. The audit took 4 months. What it found filled the newspapers Charles Hale's family had once controlled. The Eleanor Vale endowment had indeed been redirected decade after decade away from the children it was meant for. Walter Hale was long dead and beyond the reach of any court, but the truth of 1996 was entered at last into the public record. Mariah Bennett's name was cleared in the same papers that had once called her a thief. The forged manuscript became evidence in an open investigation. The Hale name came down from over the foundation's door. And Adrian Vale did what billionaires are supposed to do and so rarely manage. He pledged $1 million of his own to rebuild the scholarship fund from nothing. And he asked for only one thing in return: that it bear 2 names. It is called the Ruth Bennett Voice Access Fund. Other donors matched him within the week. The Diamond Woman gave the most. Sophie Kim was its first recipient. She is studying violin on a full scholarship, the real kind, the kind Eleanor Vale always meant. Daniel Reyes was named the conservatory's first head of ethics and safety. The first rule, he wrote, was simple: anyone who comes in from the cold gets 10 minutes and a warm seat before anyone asks them a single question. Victoria Hale left the world of charity galas. There were no more rooms left to crown her. And Mariah Bennett did not become a diva again overnight. The Velvet Thunder had been silent too long for that. And she found she no longer needed the great stage to feel whole. Instead, she accepted a new position at the conservatory, director of a community vocal access program for the children nobody thinks to ask, the ones with gifts that hide behind a uniform or an accent or a closed door. She kept her mother's pendant. She wears it on the outside now. On a quiet morning the following winter, Mariah walked into one of the old practice rooms to open it for the day. A girl was already there, maybe 12, the daughter of one of the building's janitors, who had let herself in to wait while her father worked. She was sweeping the floor, slowly, the way you do when no one is watching. And she was singing under her breath. She froze when she saw Mariah. The way you freeze when you have been caught doing something you have been taught is not for people like you. Mariah did not ask her why she was singing. She did not tell her to put the broom away. She set down her keys and she smiled, and she asked the only question that mattered. What key?